Thank you very much. What I wanted to do is talk about what we've done in Canada to address primarily inclusiveness. And I was, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm from the province of Ontario, Canada, and I was the director responsible for the digital economy strategy for the province for many years before I joined Cisco, and then I was responsible for Ontario's e-governance strategy. So we had a four-stream approach. We worked in four areas simultaneously to address these topics in the 1990s. First of all, the primary government role was to address market gaps in both supply and demand. So the government did not want to play an ongoing role in providing telecommunications or broadband infrastructure, but what it did do is develop several temporary programs to address the market gap between what the market was willing to pay and what the industry was willing to support in terms of putting broadband out across the province. The second area that we worked was in the demand side. And similarly, when demand wasn't yet there because there was no broadband in place, so communities couldn't develop applications that would use broadband, how could the government stimulate demand? So that was the second area. The third area was to provide direct support to industry to fill some content gaps, and I'll come back with some examples of each of these. And the fourth area was in the area of the government itself, how the government itself could be a better user of technology, therefore showing leadership to others in terms of how technology can be used to transform operations, but also when the government is using technology that built up demand and helped address the first two areas that I mentioned, both the supply gap as well as the demand gap. So those are the four streams of activities that we worked on, and several ministries cooperated together on this strategy, primarily the Ministries of Economic Development, Ministries of Education, Ministries of Health, Ministries of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, and the Ministry of Government Services, which also had the Information Technology Department. It was extremely important that all those ministries come together to cooperate on this overall strategy. So now just a few examples. So on the supply side of the infrastructure, we developed a program called the Ontario Network Infrastructure Program, which provided a subsidy to companies that came forward and said, we'd love to serve this area, but there isn't enough demand there, we can't afford to do it at this time. And based on a competitive analysis across competing companies, who was best positioned to do it, requirement of open standards, equal access, and some of those basic considerations, companies were awarded money to put in infrastructure for a period of 3 years in areas that the industry hadn't yet gone. And in the Ontario context, in the Canadian context, that was primarily remote rural areas as well as the distant north. So that's where subsidy was required for a period of 3 years. Those programs no longer exist. They did their job. They existed in the 90s and the early part of this millennium. They are no longer required. On the demand side, it was a similar approach. In this case, it was really important that communities came together and talk about how they would use technology if they had it. So it didn't matter where the leadership came from. It could have come from the school, the library, the community center, or some other source of leadership in the community. They were encouraged to come forward and seek funding for a period of 3 years to allow them to purchase technology services. So what they did is they came forward to the government with an application that said, this is how we would use technology if we had it. So that was addressing the demand pull side. In addition, the government directly supported demand pull in the area of education by making sure that every single school was connected, and that was achieved back in the 1990s, to ensure that there was content to deliver to the schools, and in some cases to deliver health services. The health environment in Canada is very different than that in India. It is a government funded across the board. So where one example of a health application was in the far north, patients were routinely being flown to the south to hospitals for assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. And we were able to make a business case very, very easily to put broadband to the north so that patients could stay in their communities for those purposes rather than being flown all over the province by air ambulance. So that was an example of direct government intervention. And finally, the fourth area was the government itself as a user of technology. And in that area, what we did is we took an enterprise-wide approach across the whole government to develop a common infrastructure that would be used by all departments: network, data centers, servers, desktops, help desk, and all the other IT services are provided from one place across all of government. And in so doing, it's aggregating demand and making the case to put infrastructure to all those parts of the province where the government has operations, which is virtually every community. So that helps support the business case for industry to expand and use technology. And Ontario has become a leader in e-governance, and in terms of, most of its applications are now available electronically. And it's now turning its mind, as is India, towards more open data, open governance, inclusive participation in terms of the government environment. So just in a nutshell, supply push, demand pull, and using the government itself as a leader.